Oh, hi there! Just counting down the time until Bloodborne is 10 years old so I can throw it away, cause 10 years is way icky. Oh, it hit 10 years last week? Good riddance. And if you like that, you should have seen my last birthday party. The catering was super affordable. Oh, what's that you say? It's okay for things to be old? What a relief, cause I've got all sorts of fun plans for when I'm a geezer, like playing video games. Plenty of which will be old games, which, lucky us, are here to stay. Going back to the Wii's Virtual Console, the standard was seemingly set that older games are going to be available on whatever the newest generation of consoles is, with constant demands for this title or that title. Not that older games didn't come to more recent consoles before, but the Virtual Console really popularized the idea. People ask for certain games, and those who don't know what those games are will be tempted to check them out to see what all the fuss is about. Kids, it's called Rocket Knight Adventures. You can thank me later. I'd like to think the groundwork for old games sticking around happened due to a combination of several natural causes. First thing is that many of the kids who grew up with these games became adults with disposable incomes and a realization that the true meaning of life is fun video games. You might hate your job, but at least it can fund you a copy of Choo Choo Rocket. Second factor, like I said before, the Virtual Console setting the precedent that tons of old games will be made available on newer hardware. And the final factor, I'd argue, because the scope of bigger games on consoles was increasing, including budget, size, how long games took to make, there was a natural desire for smaller games to fill in the gaps. Believe it or not, people can't just play Breath of the Wild for 100 hours. Oh, they can? Well, not everyone wants to, and even if they do, the desire for smaller, more digestible games is still there. I can consume a game like Donkey Kong 94 in one bite and poop it out the next day. I go to play a game like FF7 Rebirth and I feel like a bear going into hibernation. Time to say goodbye to the world for a few months. To a large extent, the small gaps between playing larger games gets filled by indie games, which, to a large extent, are inspired by retro games, albeit to varying degrees, but makes sense seeing as retro games provided a proven blueprint for less resource-intensive games to make than stuff like Red Dead 2. You want horse physics like these, you're gonna have to pay the piper with expensive R&D. And while I like to argue that many indie games are inspired by retro games, I should quickly address the folks who say indie games are the true retro games. Not because I want to, more because I have to. Some people are what I like to call the dictionary people. Going by a strict dictionary definition, retro means imitative of older things, not the actual old things themselves. But words get appropriated to change in meaning based on how people use them, as has happened since the beginning of time. And people use the term retro to refer to older video games. In any case, I think it's perfectly fine to say that newer games inspired by older games feel retro and could be described as such too. I personally like to think of retro as a style when it comes to games, regardless of when they were made. And it's a really popular style at that. Think about it like art. Let's say painting, been around a long time, provides some visuals that are pretty pleasing, much like pixels, has a unique look. Then compare that to something like 3D rendered art. Requires a computer, much newer than painting, and certainly has its place, but you'd be out of your mind to say it's made painting totally obsolete. And sure, that's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's just to show that newer things don't always replace older things. Your grandmammy's apple pie recipe knows what I'm talking about. Sometimes people can find it obnoxious to refer to pixel art as pixel art, but there really is a craft to arranging pixels in a way that's aesthetically pleasing, not to mention then animating them, scaling, rotating, scrolling, you name it. I've always felt that pixels just have such a clean look to them. Each pixel is basically a perfectly even square, giving uniformity to the design that provides order and well-defined structure while still allowing tons of possibility for what to do with it. And speaking of well-defined structure, the fact that pixels are often part of 2D games is a huge part of the picture as well. 2D games are definitely not going anywhere, and using pixels to make them is a match made in heaven. Seeing as pixels and sprites moving on a 2D plane is such a natural fit. 2D gaming simplifies game design in a way, allowing developers to focus on immediacy, precision, and timing in a way that 3D gaming often just cannot, at least not in the same way. Due to 3D gaming's more open-ended nature, there are people who crave what 2D has to offer. It only makes sense for it to stay around. If shovelware games get to stick around, why not 2D games? Which, to anyone who is skeptical there ever was a threat that 2D games had a chance of going away, let me take you back to the late 90s or even early 2000s when it wasn't crazy at all for people to think that 3D gaming would replace 2D gaming. When 3D games first came along, there was an obsession with it. Going from the early 90s, where consoles like the NES were really popular, to the end of the decade, where consoles like the Dreamcast were popular, things had changed very fast, and older video games weren't considered old and cool like they are now. They were just considered old, kind of like my face. Heck, I've always argued that the NES is considered less outdated now than it was in 1998. Funny how that works, right? With how much the 8-bit visual style has been imitated and referenced in newer indie games, I'd like to believe I'm not the only one who thinks using pixels as a visual style, not strictly a limitation of older technology. But even when it comes to older 3D games, for people who might consider games from the GameCube or PS2 to be retro, the visuals of a lot of these games seem to be acceptable, as I think less people are worried about what games look like these days. In fact, while I was making this video, it was announced that Switch 2 will have GameCube games, and shocker, people are excited about it. Artistic vision seems to matter to gamers more now, as it feels like we can't really get much more photorealistic at this point. Sure, there are some people who still prioritize that, but back in the 90s and even 2000s, let me tell you, we were obsessed with graphics. Each new console generation brought very tangible changes. Things were moving fast. We wanted to see how far graphical fidelity could be pushed. Nowadays, the obsession seems to be more with games simply running well and being fun to play, with room to praise games for visuals from more of an artistic vision point of view. In any case, the point I'm getting to is that even older 3D games receive a lot of demand to be re-released on newer hardware. It's got to be the latest hardware too. Wind Waker and Twilight Princess were released for the Wii U, but people want it on the Switch. Pretty tough to play the Wii U versions if you don't have a Wii U, I guess. But the demand for older games being released on newer hardware is relentless. Quick little story for you. I'm a huge fan of shoot 'em ups and a huge fan of Sega Genesis, but don't own the game Steel Empire, and still there was a modern release just for Steel Empire fans. Maybe your takeaway from that is I should own Steel Empire, but the point is that games being brought back goes to the obscurest depths. And yeah, I know part of it is that in many cases it's easier to release an older game than to make a brand new game, although there's often a big distinction between certain re-releases and remakes. And to a large extent, I agree with the people who would rather just see effort put towards making something that is indeed brand new. But that's not really what I'm arguing for or against in this video. I'm simply stating why retro games aren't going away, especially with the trend of getting these games on handhelds where the screens just keep on getting bigger. They laughed at me for practicing building up my wrist strength, but don't come crying to me when you can't hold your handhelds. So whether it's older games being re-released or remade, or newer games being made with that retro feel, fans of retro are always going to have lots to play. No collecting of old gaming stuff required, not that it stops some of us. And I should also quickly mention that we keep getting newer hardware designed to play older games as well, whether via emulation, more accurate FPGA emulation, or even hardware that lets you play the original cartridges or discs themselves. So yeah, retro is sticking around in a big way. Now, if only we can get more of the younger generations to actually play it.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games.